All right. Hello there. My name is Matthew Mackaness, and for my pricing video, I chose the topic of the tulip mania. Now, the tulip mania was a period in the Dutch Golden Age, which roughly spanned throughout the 17th century, where contract prices for some bulbs of the recently introduced and fashionable tulip reached ridiculously high prices and then dramatically collapsed in February of 1637. To most economists and historians, this tulip mania is considered the first recorded speculative bubble. For those of you not aware, a speculative bubble is a situation in which asset prices appear to be based on implausible or inconsistent views about the future. Some more recent examples of speculative bubbles include the dot-com bubble and the United States housing bubble from 2002 to 2006. Unlike other more recent speculative bubbles, tulip mania had no critical influence on the prosperity of the Dutch Republic, which at the time was the world's leading economic and financial power in the 17th century. At the peak of tulip mania, a single tulip bulb could be sold for more than 10 times the annual income of a skilled crafts worker. So how did tulips become so crazily overpriced? Despite what you might think, tulips are not indigenous to Europe. Instead, they were introduced by Ogier de Busbecq, the ambassador of Ferdinand I to the Sultan of Turkey. Busbecq sent the first tulip seeds to Vienna in 1554 as a gift from the Ottoman Empire. Quickly, this new and beautiful plant made its way around Europe until it finally arrived in Amsterdam, instantly becoming a hit because of the tulip's ability to survive in the harsh conditions of the Low Countries. Another aspect that led to the tulip's meteoric rise is that the tulip was the only plant known to Europe to possess such an intense and bright petal color. This quickly turned the tulip into a status symbol for the Dutch people during this time, and coincides with the rise of Holland's trade fortunes. At the time, Amsterdam merchants were at the center of the lucrative East Indies trade, where one voyage could yield profits of 400%. What also set the tulip apart was the different varieties of strain that farmers could produce to create even more exotic looking plants. We must remember that during this time, there were limited items on the market, and designer clothes and customizable goods were not viable to produce, even for a king sometimes. Therefore, to be able to purchase and display an exotic and rare flower, one could flaunt both one's wealth and taste at the same time. Unfortunately for us, with the death of tulip mania also came the death of a lot of these exotic tulip strains. As the flowers began to grow in popularity, professional growers paid higher and higher prices for exotic bulbs, and the overall prices increased. By 1636, French speculators had entered the market, as the demand for tulips in France had increased, resulting in even the standard tulip being bought at hundreds of florins, the Dutch currency at the time. Now, attempting to price exactly how much tulips were being sold for at the equivalent of our modern currency is a difficult matter. This is primarily because of two reasons. The first, there are extraordinarily little historical records of purchases that still exist. Tulip trading at the time was done by almost everyone, and most people did not keep records. The second is that depending on the rarity and strain of the flower, the price could drastically swing. For instance, there is one account of 40 bulbs being sold for 100,000 florins. And to give you a better sense of how much currency this is, a skilled worker at the time would make around 150 to 350 florins a year. According to the International Institute on Social History, one florin in 1637 had the purchasing power of 11.51 euros in 2016. Don't worry, I did the number crunching for you, and this comes out to 40 bulbs of tulips for roughly $1.25 million in today's currency. Some of you may be stunned to hear that, but when we compare that to today's stupidly rich people buying multi-million dollar yachts, jewelry, cars, and clothes, it puts it more into perspective that utterly rich people will just about throw their money at anything if it gives them status. By 1636, the tulip became the fourth leading export product of the Netherlands, after gin, herrings, and cheese. The price of tulips skyrocketed because of the speculation in tulip futures among people who never saw the bulbs. Many men made and lost fortunes overnight. The mania reached its peak during the winter of 1636 through 37, when some bulbs were reportedly changing hands 10 times in a day. No deliveries were ever made to fulfill any of these contracts, because in February of 1637, tulip bulb contract prices collapsed abruptly and the trade of tulips ground to a halt. The collapse began in Haarlem, when for the first time buyers apparently refused to show up at a routine bulb auction. This may have been because Haarlem was then suffering from an outbreak of bubonic plague. The existence of the plague may have helped to create a culture of fatalistic risk-taking on a purely aesthetic item that allowed speculation to in the first place. However, the plague might also have helped to burst the bubble by revealing that food and other necessary items were more important. That concludes my presentation on tulip mania. Hopefully you have found this interesting and took away that bubbles can arise around nearly any type of product and are extremely volatile space to operate within.